Columbus event. I'm Chris Berry. I'll be hosting today's conversation, which I'm really looking forward to. But to start, I want to thank a few folks. TechLife Columbus, Ben Blancara, who's joining us today for helping organize this. And so there's a ton of great partners that he's worked with to make these conversations possible in bringing folks from the Columbus and Ohio tech community together. So groups like Tech Elevator, Revell, Franklin University, Zoco Design. So all of their hard work that has gone into scheduling not events just like this specific one, but literally dozens over the course of the spring. And so I'm really excited that I can play a small role in it. And as part of today's conversation, really looking forward to welcoming our guests and talking about what's going on across the country, across the world, really, when it comes to building tech ecosystems. And so I think now we can probably start to dive into some of the introductions. And so to begin, let's see, for my screen at least, we'll start with you. So Skip Newberry. Skip, welcome to Ohio, even if it is virtual. I'll actually be joining Skip in Oregon in a couple of weeks for an event that they're doing. So I appreciate Skip taking some time to join us. And so Skip is the president and CEO of the Technology Association of Oregon. It's a group very similar, practically identical in terms of mission and work that I run, OhioX, which we are a statewide technology and innovation partnership. And so Skip, thanks so much for joining. If you wouldn't mind maybe just sharing a little bit about you, the work you're doing at TAO, and what's happening in Oregon.
Thanks for having me, Chris. So a little about me. I spent some time as an attorney, entrepreneur, and then economic development professional working for the city of Portland during the last Great Recession in 08-11. And then was asked to take over what was then the Software Association of Oregon. And that became the Technology Association of Oregon through some mergers, some rebuilding. And so TAO was created in its current form about 9 years ago. And have been running it ever since. We've got operations in Portland as well as in Eugene, and then we do some work in the central part of the state, in Bend as well. And then, interestingly, we also cover Southwest Washington. So we're one of the few technology councils of North America, member orgs that actually span 2 different states by a sliver. It's a very, very thin margin in Southwest Washington. But yeah, in terms of some of the work that's going on right now in Oregon, one thing that's top of mind is since the onset of COVID, the increasing mobility of tech talent, and how are we faring as a state in terms of public policy when it comes to incentivizing folks who want to relocate. We have a great quality of life, and so that's an interesting tool in the economic development toolbox. But the question is, what are some of the other amenities that we can offer? And that's something that the state and the greater Portland area are both trying to work on, is what's our aspirational vision for what we want to become as a tech ecosystem. We're still in sort of the awkward preteen phase in terms of growth. And we've got some growing pains, but there's also some amazing sort of strengths that we can point to. And it'll be the next 10 years, I think, that will define, frankly, how we mature.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Skip, again for joining, and looking forward to talking more about some of the work that's happening, because it's, I think I've mentioned to you in the past, I've had a few friends that have relocated out to Portland and Oregon, and it's fun kind of following what you all are up to from afar, because it seems really exciting. So thanks for joining. We'll go next to, you mentioned Techna, so we'll go to Jennifer Young. So Jen is the new CEO of Techna. So this is the Technology Councils of North America. So it's groups like Skip's and others. OhioX is among the most recent that represent and connect and provide continuing education and just all sorts of great resources to folks that are building communities and ecosystems in cities and regions and states across the country. So Jen, thanks so much for joining. And you also have some history being in Pittsburgh. So maybe a little bit about both, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure. Well, also an awesome member on here too is Joe Russo from Palm Beach Tech Hub as well. So 3 wonderful members on this panel today. But sure. So we are the Tech Councils of the Tech. We are the Tech Council of the Tech Council. So there are 60+ organizations in our membership, and we provide, opportunities for those tech councils to benchmark with each other, find out how, Chris Berry's organization's doing and finding out how Skip's doing it. The same kind of thing, but in a different part of the country, which is why this kind of conversation is really valuable, because it can provide a lot of insight in how other parts of the country is doing, advocacy and policy making, how they're doing programming and serving their members. There's a lot of really great ways that other organizations are helping to grow the tech ecosystem in their particular regions. And so, we exist to help foster those types of relationships, along with providing advocacy on behalf of the tech industry as a whole in Washington, and then helping to provide connections and some guidance in terms of, the same type of thing in the different states and then provinces in Canada. So we also represent a number of organizations in Canada as well. So we're entirely North America, not just the United States. And my background is actually from the Pittsburgh Technology Council, where I was at for 11 years, prior to coming to TechNet. And, Pittsburgh, I think, is a lot like Columbus in many, many ways, because, our regions, I think we're much more Midwest than we are East Coast, even though the other side of our state functions a little more East Coast than we do. So I think our regions are often competing for some of the same talent. We often have some of the same pain points. And so we often look, at least in Pennsylvania, look to Ohio and how they have done different things, policies and different things like that in Columbus, because you have a lot of really great innovation. You have a great, couple of tax credit programs that I know that we envy and aspire to copy as soon as possible. But I think there's a lot of other ways that the tech industry can be building its ecosystem through a couple of, tweaks and policy and things like that, that can really make big differences along the way. And also, a couple things that you do that could also crush it too. So we try to make sure that doesn't happen.
Yeah, if you have those, let us know so we can steer clear.
Sure.
Thanks, Jen, for joining. And we'll go next to Joe, who at least for me is next on the screen. And so Joe's from sunny South Florida, Tech Hub, South Florida, a newer organization, added a couple years at this point, but someone that we've looked to, and it's been fun to connect with Joe and their team and learn how they're doing it. And I think if we look at tech ecosystems, probably the hottest and most popular and most buzzy one of the past 5 or 6 months has been Miami and South Florida. So Joe, other than the mayor, what are some of the keys that you've been seeing in your part of the world?
What I heard there is South Florida is awesome, and you said that to a bunch of people in Ohio. So, way to sell us. I appreciate it. So my name is Joe Russo. I'm the president and CEO of Tech Hub South Florida. So we are very similar to the other organizations that you're familiar with, Ohio X, and of course Tech Oregon, in the sense that we are a tech association overseeing South Florida. So that essentially breaks down into 3 counties: Palm Beach, Broward, which is Fort Lauderdale, and then Miami-Dade County. And in those 3 counties, if you want to look at data, CompTIA says there's over 150,000 tech employees just in this region, which makes us the 19th largest in terms of tech talent pool in the country by a metropolitan area. But more recently, and I think what Chris is hitting on, is there is a huge push going on for South Florida right now. That momentum is absolutely real. There are so many people that are moving to South Florida because either it's the pandemic or the lifestyle or the weather. There's so many reasons that you can move to South Florida. But number one, the economy is virtualized and decentralized. You don't have to go into your office in California and New York anymore. So people have these options where they otherwise didn't, working with large companies or otherwise their companies themselves moving down here. I got an email yesterday from somebody at Goldman, and he's like, "Hey, did you hear about this Silicon Valley VC firm moving to the area?" And I'm like, "Well, no, I didn't hear about that, but you work at Goldman and I don't." So then I, started, reaching around today and trying to figure out what's going on, because, it's a word on the street, so to say, that somebody has been down here in the last 2 weeks looking. So it's been fun because those are things we wouldn't have heard about a few years ago. And if you think about it, Blackstone, one of the largest, capital organizations, really out there. I mean, they moved their headquarters down here to South Florida in Miami. And what was it? JetBlue the other day was looking at moving down to South Florida. So there's a lot of these type of conversations where big brand names are moving down, and that's unheard of, right? When there's a gentleman by the name of Brian Breslin down here who runs the Innovation Center at University of Miami, and he is by far the OG of the Miami tech community. He's been at it for 15 years. And he tweeted something the other day, I think that embodies this momentum, that somebody reached out to him who's a startup founder in California, in Silicon Valley, saying, hey, I want to go to Miami to raise some money. It's usually been the other way around. So now that we have this type of momentum, led in part by the mayor of Miami, Francis Suarez, and by so many people that have been laying groundwork over the past 15 years, we have a real opportunity to make South Florida more than just a moment in time, but a really strong stalwart for the tech industry in the United States and the world for years to come. And I'm lucky I lead an organization that plays at least just some small part in that. And Chris, I'm very humbled that you would ask me of all people to be here with you today for the work we have done, and of course as a colleague in the work that you're doing in Ohio.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. And a couple of quick comments before we introduce a few more folks. But one is a lot of the momentum, at least from afar and what I've seen and read, started with just Twitter. Where Miami's mayor, Francis Suarez, has just done a lot of this work on Twitter, which is free. He even, I think, follows me, and we've interacted on Twitter. So that kind of shows that if he's talking to me, he's talking to a lot of people.
I think you're referring to the how can I help tweet,
yeah.
Which if those are unfamiliar, somebody tweeted out a little while back, why don't we move Silicon Valley from California to Miami? The mayor quote tweeted that, how can I help? And that just took off, right? And then all of a sudden, he's tweeting with Elon Musk in the middle of the night, and it's just this, whole big thing. And a side note, Chris, I also figured out Barack Obama follows me on Twitter the other day. Brand new. I don't know how I'm such a big deal, but that's a real thing. So Twitter is real in this momentum, more than any social media, ironically, and that's been really cool to see the momentum. If you follow the right people, you'll see it very vividly.
Very cool. And I'll one other side comment before we move on is I went to Miami University in Ohio, which the joke in the T-shirts at the bookstore is that Miami was a university in Ohio when Florida belonged to Spain. So that's just kind of the history of Ohio versus Florida for you. But we'll go next to someone in higher education, venture capital, does a ton, and has studied, among other things, how the country of Israel has become startup nation, which an entire book and kind of movement has been built around. But Elad, thank you so much for joining and bringing your perspective to this conversation and international work that you're doing.
Thanks for having me, Chris. It's a pleasure and an honor to be included among these really phenomenal people doing amazing work. I've been in the startup world for a very long time. And in fact, so long that when we started doing it, we didn't know we were doing it. And we back in the 90s, when the Israeli ecosystem started to develop towards commercializing technology, it didn't really have a choice. And so it's very similar to a lot of ecosystems here in the States, in the sense that you have to think beyond where you are, because where you are will not sustain you. And there are other centers of gravity. And so you work with what you have, not a lot of natural resources over there, milk and honey notwithstanding. And so you're stuck with brain power. And you put a lot of energy into that. I'm glad that that Joe is talking about the mayor, because one of the things I've been pushing in every conversation about building ecosystems is government/civic involvement. And when you say that in the States, you always get this side eye, because usually government means more taxes, more bureaucracy, more obstacles, rather than how can I help? And so this how can I help mentality is incredibly important. And I think it's the last bastion of sort of resistance to true ecosystems, because being on the line that sort of connects higher ed. I'm a dean of a business school, but I'm also a founder and managing member of a tech venture capital fund. And I've been involved with technology and building ecosystems on both the higher ed, business, and civic side for over 2 decades. Really, one of the things that's encouraging now to see is the involvement of government / civic / nonprofit entities, because that really combined with higher ed. And I'm glad to hear that, the grand poobah of innovation in your area, Joe, is a higher ed guy, because of all the players in an innovation ecosystem, the universities are the only ones that actually have as their mission producing talent. And so when you think about it, no other player produces talent as their mission. And that's a player that you can't do without if you want to have a successful ecosystem.
Thank you, Elad. And I'm going to drop in the comments now, because it's interesting that of the 4 guests, we've touched on that policy component. And so a week from today, actually, Ohio X is hosting a tech policy summit for these very reasons. And so we have a US Senator, we have member of Congress, we have the state Senate president, our lieutenant governor, state representatives, city officials for this very reason, because what we found was these conversations just weren't happening. And in the past 5 or 6 months, we've had dozens of meetings with elected officials of all stripes across the state. And what we found is there just isn't a lot of knowledge when it comes to the tech and the elected official world, because most of them are older, they haven't worked in technology, they don't do technology. And so that's been a massive void that I think we're starting to, I won't say solve, but certainly tackle. And it's vitally important, as we've heard from a couple different states and countries and regions. But next up, I want to introduce someone else, Polly. Polly, welcome. And Polly works with Global Entrepreneurship Week and literally cities and regions across the world on building entrepreneurship, helping startups grow, build this pipeline. And so, Polly, thanks for joining. And I know you and I were just talking about Singapore and trying to have a connection between Singapore and startups from there that are trying to enter into Ohio. So welcome, and would love to hear your take on some of this.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Actually, with the Singapore connection, I talked to someone from Jobs Ohio, and it looks like they're going to set up a mini delegation for some of the folks we're working with. So we might be good on that front. But yeah, so at the Global Entrepreneurship Network, we run a platform of services focused on ecosystem development. And policy is a big part of it too. So I'm sure there'll be opportunities to chime in. But we do a lot of kind of more of the foundational work. So like actually registering some businesses. So we're working with the UN right now on developing an e-registration portal. And we have an ease of doing business index that we have. And then we have a policy atlas. So we have case studies from governments around the world who are implementing different types of policies in their communities, which is a pretty interesting thing to see. My mandate is the Global Business Angel Network. And I specifically work with angel networks across the globe. We have about 75 members, 68 countries. And we work with them to connect them with some of the folks who are working in the startup community and try to increase deal flow locally. And then we focus on cross-border syndication by getting those angel networks to participate in other broader programs and kind of share deal flow in a sense. Beyond that, I run a program called Startup Huddle, another program where we're in about 72 countries. We have each program, we have a community organizer or a national license holder that works with the government. And what they do is they set up these weekly or monthly programs that kind of follows the Kaufman model, where everyone comes together and you have a business present their ideas. We're the longest running grantee of the Kaufman Foundation. We're actually kind of the global arm of the Kaufman Foundation. And so a lot of our mandate comes from their work, and we are pretty much, some of their best friends. And beyond that, we work with UNCTAD, United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. And we do similar initiatives with them where we're working to just develop the basic infrastructure for business around the globe. And then one final thing I'll plug in here is the Global Entrepreneurship Congress. So from the delegation, that we build with our programs in each country. We invite everyone to a global conference every year. It's been running for 12 years. This year we'll be in Saudi Arabia. And what we do is we kind of just set an agenda and bring everyone around the table to talk about how to develop ecosystems in their respective regions. So yeah, that should be good.
Well, thank you, Paulie. And I just put in the chat, would welcome anyone that's listening in or have questions or thoughts or comments, put them in the chat or raise your hand. We hope it's an interactive conversation. And so something I wanted to kickstart with, and I've been thinking a lot about, and Skip, maybe we can start with you, is curious as to what the kind of traditional sectors, industries, business communities that Portland and Oregon and Southwest Washington have, because here in Ohio, we have things like manufacturing, healthcare, insurance. And so Columbus, where I'm at, and a couple of us are at, we're growing into this InsurTech hub. And it's not, it's not the next social media app or the next Facebook or Twitter, but these are incredible businesses that are really innovating and growing and employing Ohioans. So what does that look like in your part of the world, in Portland and Oregon, for how tech in your region exists? And like, how did it kind of grow, and what is it reflective of?
Yeah, if you think about like pure tech companies in general, we're really well known for semiconductors and devices, and that's a huge portion of the overall tech sector. It's the largest facility of Intel's in the world outside, actually in the world, period. And they're investing billions and billions of dollars on more fab-related expansions. And so there's this whole semiconductor device ecosystem around that facility. And so that's definitely a big part of it. Out of that flowed the evolution of the open source community that is pretty big. So embedded software related to devices and semiconductors, then gave rise to mobile during that wave. And so that kind of helped to evolve the software ecosystem, mostly in the last 15 years. And so that's coming on strong. Software is growing faster than semiconductor and device. Nationally, semiconductor and device is declining in most markets. In Oregon, it's been just holding steady. And software is kind of taking off and eating the world, as everyone's pointing out. And in terms of the other sectors that are interesting, like I grew up in the Northeast and knew nothing about Oregon growing up, except that I always thought that there was this perpetual warfare between like loggers and spotted owls. And Nike was located somewhere in the state. That's about all I knew. And when I got out there, I realized there was a lot more going on. And yes, there's the forest products industry, and specifically food and ag are huge now, big export. And a lot of that is also related to food and ag brands that are known globally. So consumer products is big. There's also a lot of innovation increasingly around healthcare. So Phil Knight, founder of Nike, donated a bunch of money to Oregon Health and Science University. It amounted to about $1 billion. And then another amount of money, about the same, to University of Oregon, all related to health and wellness. And so there's some massive investment in recruiting of top talent from all over the world to those two facilities. And that spawned a lot around big data, bioinformatics, genomic cancer research, et cetera. And we're seeing this intersection now between the Nikes, Adidas, Under Armour's, Columbia, Danner Boots. We're kind of the center of the athletic and outdoor universe. So those companies are doing preventative health and wellness. So are the major hospital systems. Kind of right in the middle there is tech. So that's increasingly where we're seeing a lot of startup activity around digital health. And we're also a safety valve for both the Seattle and Silicon Valley markets in terms of cost of living and quality of life. So a lot of talent and startups flowing into the Portland area in particular, but also increasingly now Eugene and Bend, where we're seeing a lot of startup activity in digital health and wellness. So some exciting stuff.
Curious, you mentioned semiconductors a moment ago, and if you open up the Wall Street Journal or have on CNBC, it's a topic every day, with just this global race really between countries, especially the US and China and Taiwan. And so there's all this political and policy to it. So have you seen have you felt that effect locally, whether it's just new investment or just kind of buzz within the tech community of the importance of this and this kind of conversation about reshoring some of these things?
Yeah, we have. In fact, we do a lot of work with different trade offices in different countries, and not surprisingly, we've had outreach from Taiwan, Korea, and Japan in a big way just in the last like month. And typically it was all about China. And now with the shift in the administration's policy, that's definitely shifted and caused a lot of companies to reevaluate supply chains and networks. And so that's a big deal for a lot of the semiconductor and device companies for sure.
Interesting. Thank you. Jen, I'd be curious, and you mentioned the synergies between like a Pittsburgh and a Columbus. When I think of tech in Pittsburgh, I think of things like robotics and artificial intelligence, but that's not necessarily like, it's not Silicon Valley where some of this stuff was born, but in some ways it's moved east. And so what has been it like over the past however many years that you've been involved with the tech sector? And just how do you think what are the keys to the growth of those types of places within the tech field?
Well, I will say access to human capital, obviously. I mean, they're going to go where they can find the people, and they have a very specific prescription. All software and all tech has a specific prescription of the type of people they're looking for. And I think they're going to land wherever they can find them. That being said, I think the pandemic has maybe shifted some of that and allowed them to think a little bit more broadly in terms of how they're attracting people and where they're getting them from. But I do think in terms of research and development, those are, some hands-on things that they, depend on being in person with. So, attraction to the workforce they're looking for. And I think the right policies that are in place that allow that kind of thing to happen. I keep going back to that, but it is so true. I mean, if there is a place that makes it really easy, to invest in particular types of technologies, or to, hire people, or, in terms of, artificial intelligence and self-driving vehicles, things like that. I mean, that is a hotbed for who knows what kind. I mean, some friends of mine are now, in government affairs with these companies, kind of brand new roles, and they're writing the playbook for what those types of regulations look like with the Federal Highway Administration and, at least in Pennsylvania with PennDOT. So I think, depending on the type of technology you're in, I think it really, depends on really what they're looking for, obviously, and then what they have access to the easiest. And I think that people can make that happen. A lot of it can be really just fostering what they already have. And it'll, if you build it, it'll come, but you build a good ecosystem and it'll come.
Elad, I'd love to go back to some of your opening comments, and you made the joke of kind of milk and honey for Israel, but Israel is one of those global places that 50 or 75 years ago, none of this tech existed. And I also think of like Singapore, and Skip, you mentioned Taiwan, South Korea has also been examples of this. But as you've studied, and I know I saw a post actually from LinkedIn that you might even be going back with your MBA class to Israel sooner rather than later, which is awesome to hear because of COVID and delays there. But what have been some of those keys to have been building up this incredible tech sector within, again, a country that doesn't have that historical, all those years at its disposal because it's newer, and also the natural resources aren't necessarily there.
Yeah, it's an interesting case study. And Singapore, by the way, keeps coming back to Israel to see what it can take and replicate. And because there are a lot of similarities between the two countries. One thing that I think existed before anything is the actual desire to live. And I'm not exaggerating. When you need to innovate because you're surrounded by neighbors who are not necessarily too friendly, then you have this engine of innovation that for lack of a better term, the defense mechanism in Israel produces because it has to. But I'd like to segue from that to what we were talking about before, and that is government and other support, not necessarily business sector support, and what that means. What the Israeli government has, when it exists, has a great plan where it invests in technology and basically gives it as a grant if you fail, and takes back the investment, only the investment, if you succeed. And so if you develop things for the military or for other defense mechanisms or for anything, for science, for whatever it is, medicine, with state money, and then you go out and you branch out on your own. And by the way, whatever you do develop for the state, you own the IP. You, the individual, owns the IP, even though you developed it for the state, and anything that is not top secret, that is. And so think about that investment that a nation makes, saying, look, we'll train you, we'll pay for that training, we'll have you develop really amazing things, and then when you're done with your service, it's yours, and you can do whatever you want with it. And if you need money, we'll give you money, and if you succeed, we'll take back our investment, and if you don't, it's a grant. That is a huge investment in every level of the word that a country, a society makes. And of course, it really filters into the population, understanding that innovation is the path to success. And it goes through, as I was saying before, it goes through education. And so the educational institutions are some of the best, some of the leading in the world in terms of commercializing IP. And then when you look, I think one of the things we were talking about before is what kind of technologies evolve. The technology, you're never going to see a Facebook or a Twitter come out of a place like Israel. You're never going to see what I call retail technology coming, meaning the end user technology coming out of a place like Israel. Israel focuses on large institutional needs like AI, like cybersecurity, like self-driving cars, and all the stuff that we've been talking about. And so, and again, the idea is that they go across sectors, right? AI is across sectors, whether it's fintech or insurtech, or one of the things that I'm passionate about, not just because I'm in higher ed. I think we, all of us here in the United States, are still seeking the epicenter for ed tech. I think ed tech is on the verge of becoming the new fintech, in the sense that if you look at education institutions in this country and what they're generating, what they're producing, how many people go through them, and with or without the pandemic, definitely the pandemic hastened it. Ed tech is the next frontier. There's no question in my mind, for two reasons. One is really bright people are developing really amazing things. And the other is myself and my colleagues in higher ed are too slow and lazy. And so if we're not going to innovate, someone else is going to innovate for us. That's just the law of innovation ecosystems.
Thanks a lot. You always you always have a good comment on your fellow colleagues in this space, and it's been cool to see what you've built and are building at Ashland, because you're innovating from within, which is awesome. But I want to hop over to Tyler, who's actually joining us from Iowa and the Technology Association of Iowa. So it's cool to see another state joining us. And Tyler, welcome. And if you just maybe would share a little bit about yourself, but also what you're doing in Iowa and what are some of the tech hotspots?
Sure. Well, this is a great discussion, and I am pleasure to see the other people on the stage here. So quickly, Technology Association of Iowa, very similar to Skip and Joe, statewide organization. We represent around 360 member companies. I will say candidly, we are clearly a much smaller association, probably than some of the other folks here. And so we've kind of had to be really purposeful in how we go after building that ecosystem. One of the unique challenges that we have is the fact that we're a ag, manufacturing, and weirdly insurtech heavy sort of ecosystem in the state. Two of the three typically don't have what we would consider to be a CIO or a CTO or a tech person in charge. And so we spend a lot of time and resources on really trying to build a narrative of every company is a technology company. You are all technology workers at this point. And to the extent that we can sort of inception that into our elected leaders' minds and have them start to parrot that talking point has served us pretty well. One thing that I'm particularly curious, and I don't want to sidetrack this conversation, but I would love to hear from some of the other speakers. How are you guys really working with the meetup groups, the other networking sort of ancillary groups, and bringing them into the fold? I know for us, do a really good job of connecting with that C-level individual, and sometimes at the detriment of, what I would consider the real workers. So And if that's not kosher to ask that question, totally fine too. But.
Totally cool. And I saw Joe's eyes light up, which I would have guessed that had I known the question was coming. So Joe, why don't you talk? Because I know, one, you guys do a ton of work and have a ton of those things and work with a bunch of different folks in South Florida. So take it away.
I think, Chris, we've talked about that, and Tyler. I don't know who's running Zoom to let him in here, but I know Tyler and I spoke about that not that long ago too. And you know, the fun thing about a lot of us in the call who work with these different organizations, I know Tyler, Skip, Jen, like we've all met and have worked together over the years. And you know, I think you know, an example for Skip, like he's come to me and I've gone to him in Oregon to even see up close, you know, how we've worked in each other's regions. But back to, you know, South Florida, we really see the community aspect of what we do as a hugely important task, and it's very valuable to our members. So I'll break it down into what the 4 pillars of our organization are. Talent, we've talked a lot about that so far. Brand, community, and startups. So the community piece, number 3 there, is something we started with very early on. And the first thing I did at all in building the organization was a weekly email. We've not missed a week since we started. We took off for the holidays, I mean, obviously, but we've not missed a week. And we've kept all of the news information in there. We've aggregated meetup events. If you go to our site, which was, you know, down for half the day, of course, now that I'm mentioning it, you know, we've always made sure that we've had the calendar on there, and we featured people. But what I think a lot of us in the industry association or the tech council, tech association realm miss is the fact that, you know, we go out and we get members. We go and get Fortune 1000 companies, funded startups all the time, and we build a really great peer network of these companies and the leaders of those companies, which is awesome. But we miss the grassroots sometimes. And this happens with everybody. And something from my aspect is the grassroots is the most important piece to these leaders sometimes. Because if you go to a CIO and he says, hey, I need to go hire a bunch of people, you need to say, hey, you should go out and talk to some of the meetup groups, share the story of your company, the culture, you know, try and recruit some of these people from the community, share it out there so people are talking about what you're doing, raise the level of awareness. And, you know, we've done that in a lot of ways by working directly with the meetup organizers. You know, at one point in Palm Beach County, where I am, which has got 1.5 million people population, and the largest county east of the Mississippi land-wise, just to put it in perspective. But we had like 5 JavaScript meetups at one point, which made no sense, right? So we went to each one of them and said, hey, do you guys know each other? Because we're trying to do the same thing. And that actually whittled down to 2, which is good because those were 2 in very, you know, far apart areas. And then they wound up merging actually over COVID because they went virtual anyway. We're trying to do the same thing right now with the Ruby community. So Ruby on Rails, there are 3 different meetups. Most of them kind of gone offline. So we're working with a few people. We've gotten the right folks together. So then we can connect the dots that helps them out, drives those resources forward, and they can build their communities better organically by just us, you know, pushing the right buttons here and there. On top of that, we have a Slack channel that's over 4,000 people, I think closer to 5,000. I know Tyler and I spoke about that. And we got early in the game on the Slack channel bit. This is like 5-6 years ago, where we just invited our entire email list to a Slack channel. And now we have the South Florida Tech Community Slack channel, right? And we're trying to do what we can to keep that very community centric. So we hand out admin rights to different people who are you know, moderators, so to say. They lead meetup communities. They might do things themselves. So we're trying to do it with people, you know, and that's the thing. And I was talking to somebody yesterday on the phone, was like, well, why are you interested in what I'm doing with the meetups? I'm like, because what you're doing is the most important part of this. You know, you're building a community, you're getting people together, you're talking about things that are important to you, but you times that by 100, and that's what really does the work. Because if you have a Fortune 1000 company, and let's take Amazon, for example. because Amazon was looking at South Florida for a while, a couple years ago. If Amazon moved down to Florida and sucked all the air out of the room, we wouldn't have the startup momentum we do now. I firmly believe that, because you would have had so much focus on Amazon, on one company, that, you know, all of these little things that go on, either it be the many startups or the educational institutions that are trying to push so much out right now in terms of talent and programs, credentialing, and in this as well with the grassroots community and all of the different topics that are hit on. We're hitting the mark overall because of the chaotic nature of our tech community. If we can help connect the dots so people can work together and they can drive home their passions, there's no telling where South Florida can go. But it does take a little bit of time. It is a long game for sure.
And kind of want to shift it a little, but as we're talking about talent and inspired in part by Skip, your comments of the in-between Seattle and Silicon Valley. And then Joe, I think I actually saw in one of your newsletters this week or posts about how there was some type of tech event in Miami or South Florida, but only like 5 of the 25 people or some statistic like that were actually have lived in Miami or Florida for more than the past 6 months. Like everyone else was brand new as part of this new pipeline. So maybe we'll start with Skip, but how do you balance that? Because here in Ohio, our governor and lieutenant governor and our kind of economic development group called Jobs Ohio is placing a big emphasis on recruiting companies, recruiting talent from those coastal cities to come back home. And we're seeing it at Ohio X, where a ton of people are reaching out to us trying to learn what's going on. But how do you manage that where it's not so overwhelming that it's all these new people and you kind of lose what has built the community, but at the same time welcoming them, because that's a great thing when new talent and people want to come back?
Yeah, it's a complex question for sure. I think there's also a tendency in a lot of places to say, well, you know, it's great that we discovered, you know, this particular location when we moved here, and then like, you know, forget about the subsequent waves necessarily. This is kind of our place, and let's maintain the sort of Goldilocks phenomenon for as long as we can, which is not too big, not too small, et cetera. And I think that only lasts so long. And right now we're running into issues in Portland where, when I started this work in tech and economic development, I'm dating myself here, but in 08, 11, when I was in the public sector, the big issue was we're a flyover. No one has access to capital. None of the VCs are paying attention. That has changed dramatically. And so now the big issue is talent. Like, people cannot get enough inputs to growth on the talent side to fuel all the funding and everything else that's flowing into the state. So we have a great base of junior talent. And that's been the case for a long time. Some great universities. It's a destination state for a lot of folks. We've continued to be a top net in-migration state in the country for many years now. And that has continued even during last year, believe it or not. And so the question is, like, as we're starting to evolve and mature, we need people who have success and experience building and taking companies from, you know, 100 million to $1 billion in terms of revenue and valuations. And so companies are importing that talent to a certain extent. And one of the challenges there is, you know, getting people to understand culturally that there are some great folks locally who have come close to that experience and just need a shot. And so the challenge is really on the investor side, especially for those that are venture backed. It's kind of convincing the right types of investors that, hey, there's some great talent here, and stop doing the formulaic, who's in my Rolodex that's already done this before in some other market that we can bring in and kind of place into this ecosystem. Because what we're seeing is that with stakeholder capitalism rising and demands both from employees as well as external customers and other community folks on companies, not just in tech, but across the board, leadership teams need to be attuned to the local market as much as to global factors. And so having leadership that has been in a market for some time, building teams and running teams and recruiting people is going to be important. And we've got some investors and some companies that are recognizing that here, the uniqueness of individual markets, including here in Oregon. But I think that's something that we're going to be watching going forward. And there's also the expectations of the community about tech, right? So great, now tech is seen as a big deal in Portland. Before the pandemic, tech had responsibility for taking most of the commercial real estate downtown. That was a huge change in 10 years. And so suddenly tech was seen as a dominant player. But was tech seen as a dominant player in the arts organizations in their funding or in civic issues? Well, not so much. And so the question is, what role do tech companies have in the broader ecosystem as their clout and power and influence increases? Obviously, we're seeing stuff in DC legislatively and at the state level in terms of what that ascendance to power has kind of caused, which is people to question the use of that power and is it being used wisely, et cetera. So I think it's a really interesting time and place. And as we're thinking about the recruitment and retention of talent, that really factors into this because it's going to be incumbent upon these teams to understand local dynamics and global, and being able to have folks who have come up out of an ecosystem are going to make companies stronger, I think.
Really interesting. And a lot of, I want to kick it to you because I saw you nodding your head. And then so maybe if you want to touch on this, but another thing, kind of a part two to it, we've been hearing about Oregon and Florida and Iowa and all over the world, but you work in Ashland, but you're from the Cleveland area. And so there's so much interesting kind of ecosystem dynamics just in our state alone, which are very, very different. And Cleveland, for instance, a couple of years ago wanted to become like the blockchain capital of the world. And a lot of our mutual friends were, have been part of that. You were part of that and a bunch of others. So maybe if you want to talk about, piggyback anything Skip mentioned, but then talk a little bit about Cleveland and how that community came together, because as Skip was mentioning kind of that civic side, that's where I think Cleveland, for better or for worse, blockchain, right or wrong, it was amazing to see the senior level representation come together to pull it together.
Yeah, the Blockland effort, I think, was commendable simply for its own sake, in the sense that you have a highly politicized system like Cleveland is, and anybody that knows anything about Ohio knows the fiefdoms that make up this city, and the complete resistance to collaboration to the point of self-destruction. And so that was an admirable effort of really all the players, really every single player at every size, from every sector, from the nonprofits and the largest foundations to business to everything else. But again, admirable effort, and it always comes up against two things. And we talked about this, as this is becoming a common theme for this conversation. It comes up against capital and talent. And so both of which were not to be found, are not at the level to become the center of gravity for blockchain technology in the world, which, by the way, is still up for grabs. There's despite a lot of hype about blockchain, first of all, most people, even some people that I would have thought know a little bit better, most people don't necessarily understand what that technology is and what can be used to build on top of it. And so there's really not a lot of momentum, specifically in any region or in any industry. Although you would think fintech would gravitate to it and others, but I see a lot of potential for healthcare. So if you look at all that and what we're doing here, if you look at contemporary context, vaccinations, right? I mean, we those of us who get vaccinated, we get this little piece of paper that the pharmacist writes on with a pen, and it goes nowhere. And I've come up against it because, as you mentioned, I'm going to Israel next week, and so I'm going to Israel next week, and I'm going to come with my little CDC card. They already told me we don't care about that card. It means nothing. We can't validate it, and so you're going to have to get tested for antibodies when you land here, or you're going right into into some hotel/prison. And so, there was a lot of opportunity, and there still is a lot of opportunities in Rust Belt communities. I certainly count Pittsburgh as one of those to find their way. But again, it's going to come up against two things. It's going to come up against talent, and it's going to come up against capital. Yes, capital has become more widespread. Yes, there's more opportunities to launch things, but I think if you don't see institutional players take it as their mission to initiate innovation and to support entrepreneurs and innovators at a variety of levels, we're not going to maximize it. Again, we made a valiant effort with blockchain. Didn't work, but that's fine. Any of us who deal in this space know you fail a lot more than you succeed. And so and there's no shame in it. And that's another thing that we need to get over. A lot of us still think that failing is this huge scarlet letter that you should be hiding. It's not. It's the exact opposite. My fund would rather invest with a team that has failed multiple times than with someone or a group or a team that has never done anything. And so again, it comes back to talent and capital.
And I think,
Yeah.
and Paulie, let's go to you.
I want to piggyback off what you said. I was involved with the blockline effort too. I was on the talent node and the next gen node. And with the talent node, I was working with them to identify and scout startups in the blockchain space from all around the world. And we had this idea that, okay, yeah, we're going to help fund to get them here. There's this incentive that we were going to put them up. And, we did do some of that, but we missed a lot of the opportunities for the follow through because we didn't have the type of early stage investors here to incentivize them to come and move. We actually had a lot of attention and momentum that was built up that was just kind of like pushed to the wayside because at the end of the day, and this is something that I'm a little biased about, but I think it's the angel ecosystem that we didn't have fully developed. And I think that's something that a lot of places kind of push to the wayside when they're thinking about developing ecosystems, is this idea that there needs to be networks of individuals who are working with larger networks that are plugged into all the actual startup talent around the globe and who can speak to that and be the ones that are kind of like ushering them through the door into your city, into your community. And that's where I think, a lot of missed opportunities are. It's that not having the angel capacity, the early stage seed capacity to support the startups that are growing or that you want to grow if this is an attraction opportunity. But
I couldn't agree more. I think one of the shortcomings of Midwestern investors is that they're not tech savvy. They'd much rather invest, and you can't blame them, in medical office buildings and all the other stuff that they've been making money off of for decades. And so one of the ways that we raised our fund, which is entirely Cleveland based, all of our partners are Cleveland based, never invested in technology before, is exactly what you're saying, Paulie. We actually went, instead of saying, inject all this amazing amounts of money into technology that will most likely fail, which was part of the pitch, by the way. I pitched it that way in the sense of, look, you're never going to see this money again, and most likely. However, we went with the co-investing model, which you alluded to, riding the coattails of much bigger VCs and sort of dipping our collective toe in the VC water, so to speak. And overcoming that resistance, and then it gets excited. You get a little bit of traction, and maybe you overcome that resistance. But there's no question there's an investor mentality, especially in the Midwest and the Rust Belt, that just doesn't know this and certainly doesn't find it attractive.
Well, thanks a lot, and Paulie, for that. And so we have about 6 minutes left. So a couple notes is, I believe our producers are going to drop a quick survey. If you wouldn't mind filling it out, we'd really appreciate it. Get some data on this. And so it should just be popping up now. And as it does, I'm going to give Skip, Jen, Joe, and Tyler, since they're joining us from out of state, an opportunity for a quick round robin of just a final comment. But something that at Ohio X we love to do is end our conversations with, what's one prediction for the future of, and it's, whatever topic. And so we'll start with you, Skip, but what's a prediction you think for your state, your city, when you think of tech and what it might look like in 5, 15, 25 years?
Yeah, I would say that, I'm still bullish on a few things. One, the fact that we're a low cost, major metro with a high quality of life along the West Coast. And that's not changing anytime soon. And so I think as we look at more distributed, decentralized tech companies with talent all over the place, I think there's going to be winners and losers in that. And I'd put Oregon on the winning end. We've definitely got some headwinds when it comes to policy environments and business friendliness in some cases, but at least when it comes to talent, we're getting a huge influx from folks still, which is great. And I would say that for me, the big opportunity is, again, that nexus between the healthcare side of things and the athletic and outdoor industry. There is just so much in the way of resources there. And with tech in the middle, I think it's going to explode.
It's all, and I don't think it's actually, I think they're Boston, but I have my Whoop on. And so I love the innovation in this space. So love following along with what you all are up to. So thank you, Skip. Jen, we'll go to you next.
I was going to say, I mean, just more speaking on behalf of Pittsburgh, simply because that's where a lot more of my history is from. I'm almost going to repeat very similar to what Skip said, but I think a lot of the attraction in Pittsburgh is the fact that it is a low cost of living. We have great education. The way one of the local engineer attracted a lot of the Googlers from Mountain View was putting the cost of houses on the back of stall doors in Mountain View, and attracted a bunch of people from California to move here. So I think that easily is a reason why the tech industry will move here, because they can have access to a lot of really high level educated individuals coming out of Carnegie Mellon and out of Pitt, and not have to live in California or in Boston, where the cost of living is so high. So a big plus.
Thank you, Jen. Joe, other than us all apparently moving to Miami to work for your mayor.
Hey, come on down. I see Tyler, I see Chris, you guys are wearing jackets. I don't know what that's all about. It's a cool 70 something degrees out here right now.
Not funny.
I think, in South Florida, I can tell you one of the things we're going to really be focusing on continually is talent. By our next board meeting next week, every dean of all the major universities down here will be on our board, together with industry from Fortune 1000 companies and startups. So, we're really double, triple downing on the talent side, because as this momentum continues, we're going to need to focus on that talent pool and that pipeline. I think that, one thing for South Florida that I've been looking for is not just the fad of everything that's going on here, but is the infrastructure moving here. You saw Keith Rabeau with that, and referenced him earlier from Founders Fund, Chris. They moved an office here. They signed a lease. They're bringing their folks down here. So we're going to continue to see that. And I think that infrastructure being here is going to really drive forward for us.
Thanks, Joe. Tyler, anything from Iowa?
I love going last on these sort of scenarios. I'd echo a lot of what Skip said, and the same with Jennifer. Low cost of living. I think some things that are hopeful that we see right now, currently our governor is proposing something to the order of $450 million in broadband infrastructure across the state to make sure everybody can have access to high-speed internet. That is long overdue. You'll continue to see investment, specifically in that ag tech and biotech space, because we have so much insurance and finance, that there's already existing investment there. My hope, or my prediction, whatever you want to call it, for the future, is to yet be seen. My personal opinion is the distributed workforce and this hybrid work model is going to be here to stay, I think, especially for this industry. And so, the challenge for Iowa-based technology companies, or, again, I think they're all technology companies, is how are you going to recruit and retain that talent, and allow them to, quote, work from anywhere. And so the ones that figure that out quickly, I think, will be able to grow. The ones that I think stick to this myopic, no, you need to come into the office every day, are going to struggle. So that's the world as I see it, at least for today.
All right. Thanks, Tyler. Well, and we'll do Paulie and then Elad real quick. So Paulie, anything to final thoughts? And you're on mute.
The only final thought I would have is, don't forget the importance of really, really aligned angel investors. I really think that it's something that we kind of sleep on. A lot of us, no matter what position we're in, is the importance of early stage investment. And they're the doorway for any sort of startups to actually make their way into the foreground of the ecosystem. And by the way, I just got the vaccine yesterday, so I might sound a little sick. I'm still sick. But yeah, I think it's a really important thing to remember. In a lot of the communities around the world that I'm working in right now, we have developing angel ecosystems. And without those angel ecosystems, their country, the startups there have no floor to stand on, nothing. And they're really like the engine in a sense. And if you can also get them aligned with public policy, which we talked about a lot on this call, then you're starting to win. And I think that's going to be a big thing. Like for instance, in the UK, there's, what is it? I think the incentive tax is like 30 to 50% or something tax back for angels and investors. So all that money that they could put in, the government backs them and then incentivizes so much development. And I think that's where we're missing. And I'm not us specifically, but a lot of places. And that's just the one last thing I'll emphasize.
Cool. Thanks, Paulie. Elad?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more about government incentives. One thing that I would like to see, and believe we will see, is, and I referred to that before, is co-investing and fractional investing on the angel side. I think the wrong impression is that you have to be a person of really extreme high net worth to be an angel investor. And I think there are not enough vehicles for folks who are not necessarily at that level, but would love to jump in on a more collective type of platform. I think that there's huge opportunities for doing that. I've been a part of that type of fund for a very long time, and it's phenomenal. It gets a lot of people in who didn't think they would have any opportunity to do that. My prediction is you're going to see a lot more co-investing, fractional investing on the angel side.
Well, thank you a lot. And Skip, Jen, Joe, Elad, Tyler, Paulie, Maddie, Kyle, Warner, others, Ken, thank you so much for joining us today. I could go another hour or two, but for the sake of those on the West Coast, Skip, your workday, and Tyler in Central, I'm sure you got to get back to the office. But thank you everyone for joining us and really appreciate it. This has been so much fun and really cool to hear what's going on across the country and world. So thank you everyone. Have a good afternoon, rest of your day, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Yes.
Cool. I just moved everybody to the waiting room. I think it's just us now. I think that went well. I'm gonna stop the recording.